समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to ThePrint. This is Bidisha and you're watching Economics. The Economic Survey 2025-26 was tabled in Parliament today. It is the government's most comprehensive report card on the Indian economy, and it also sets the intellectual framework for the union budget. In this explainer, I'll walk you through 10 key takeaways, refer directly to the charts from the survey, and also share my own analysis on what these numbers really mean. Takeaway 1. India remains the fastest growing major economy. India's economy is estimated to grow 7.4% in the fiscal year 2026, with gross value added growth at 7.3%. The survey also revises India's potential growth rate upward to about 7% from around 6.5% 3 years ago. This revision is significant because it reflects changes in the economy's capacity, not just a good year. What stands out to me is that growth is no longer being described as policy-driven or temporary. The survey is effectively saying India's growth ceiling has moved up, but only if reforms continue. Takeaway 2. Growth is expected to remain resilient in the fiscal year 2027. India's GDP growth for fiscal year 2027 is projected at 6.8 to 7.2%, even as the global economy remains fragile. The survey repeatedly cautions that the world economy is entering a period of permanent uncertainty, from geopolitics to trade and capital flows. However, India has been described as relatively better off due to its domestic market size, macro stability, and strategic autonomy. This is not optimism, it's calibrated realism. The survey is saying India can grow steadily, but not by ignoring global risks, only by managing them better than the others. Takeaway 3. Inflation has been decisively brought under control. India's average headline CPI inflation between April and December 2025 was just 1.7%, the lowest since the CPI series began. The decline was driven mainly by food and fuel prices, which together account for 52.7% of the CPI basket. Crucially, inflation has fallen without a collapse in demand. This matters highly because it tells us inflation has been controlled through supply improvements and not economic pain. That's the difference between stability that lasts and stability that cracks later. Takeaway 4. India is in a rare Goldilocks macroeconomic phase. Low inflation and strong growth have allowed monetary policy to turn supportive. In December 2025, the RBI cut the policy rate to 5.25%, describing the economy as being in a Goldilocks phase. Not too hot, not too cold. This is an unusual alignment, especially for a large emerging economy. What's important here is not just the rate cut, but the confidence behind it. It signals that policymakers believe growth can continue without reigniting inflation. Takeaway 5. Government capital expenditure has risen at a historic scale. Government capital expenditure has increased nearly 4.2 times, from 2.63 lakh crore in fiscal year 2018 to 11.21 lakh crore rupees in fiscal year 2026, the latter being the budget estimate. Effective capital expenditure in the fiscal year 2026 stands at rupees 15.5 lakh crore. Infrastructure is now clearly positioned as the central driver of medium-term growth. This is no longer counter-cyclical spending. it's structural. The real test will be whether this public investment consistently crowds in private investment or not. Takeaway 6. Infrastructure outcomes are now visible across sectors. The national highway network expanded by about 60% from 91,287 kilometers in fiscal year 2014 to 1,46,572 kilometers in the fiscal year 2026. Operational high-speed corridors increased nearly tenfold from 550 kilometers to 5,364 kilometers. Airports increased from 74 in 2014 to 164 in 2025. Infrastructure only matters when it shows up in productivity, not press releases. The scale here suggests that India is finally building networks, not just isolated assets. Takeaway 7. Exports hit record highs led by services. India's total exports reached a record of $825.3 billion in the fiscal year 2025, growing 6.1% year-on-year. This growth was driven mainly by services exports, while merchandise trade continues to face global headwinds. The survey also highlights India's expanding network of free trade agreements. Services are stabilizing India's external account, but they cannot carry it alone forever. That's exactly why manufacturing competitiveness remains the unresolved piece of the puzzle. Takeaway 8. The banking system is in its strongest shape in decades. Gross NPAs fell to 2.2%, while net NPAs declined to 0.5% by September 2025. Bank credit growth accelerated to 14.5% year-on-year. This combination, clean balance sheets and strong credit growth, is quite rare. Healthy banks don't guarantee growth, but weak banks guarantee stagnation. This is one of the most underappreciated positives in this survey. Takeaway 9. Employment policy is shifting towards formalization and security. The survey highlights the implementation of the 4 labor codes which now formally recognize gig and platform workers. Draft rules were published in December 2025, expanding social security and benefit portability. The emphasis is on quality of employment, not just job counts. India's employment challenge is no longer just creating jobs, it's creating secure jobs. Labor reform will matter more in execution than in legislation. And finally, takeaway 10. Climate action is now core economic policy, but finance continues to remain the constraint. The survey makes it clear that climate action is central to India's development strategy, not just an environmental afterthought. However, it also states that climate finance remains the binding constraint and domestic resources alone are insufficient. India argues that higher climate ambition must be matched by global finance and technology flows. This is climate realism, not just climate retreat. The economic survey is arguing for ambition that is economically and socially sustainable. The Economic Survey 2025-26 presents an economy that is stronger, more resilient, and more self-aware than before. But it also makes one thing very clear. India's biggest challenge now is execution, turning growth into jobs, infrastructure into productivity, and ambition into outcomes. That is the real test ahead of the union budget. Thanks for watching Economics on The Print.